Anybody got a joke? I was trying to liven it up a little more. It's quiet in here.
That's all right. Wait till day 2.
Yeah.
You know what it's like. All right. Can y'all hear me in the back okay? I got a joke. Did y'all hear the top 50 cybersecurity experts in the world disappeared? Y'all know where they went? They ran somewhere. Okay, well, welcome to Founders Academy, everyone. Welcome to those of you here in Austin. Welcome to the entrepreneurs and mentors in Houston that are joining us via live stream, and those that are in Dallas joining us via live stream. Happy to have you. My name's Gordon Doherty. I'm co-founder and president here at Capital Factory and an avid publisher of educational and advisory content on a site called SHOCKWAVE Innovations. Want to introduce myself just briefly and then cover a few of the logistics before we dive into the sessions. Got a lot to cover today. So a little bit about me for those of you that don't already know me. I had a 29-year professional career before Capital Factory. About half of that was in Fortune 500s. The other half was in startups and early stage high growth chaos. I've been involved in raising $80 million in private and venture capital, including raising money for some venture funds. I got a couple IPOs under my belt. One of them is a founding advisor. The other one is an operator. Been very involved in acquisitions, mostly on the buy side. Have a couple sell side transactions. One of them was a $200 million acquisition of a company that we built. You'll hear me tell a little bit about that story. I think it's on day 3. I've made more than 200 investments as a VC and angel investor. I've been advising startups for a long time, going back to 2000. And I'm pretty active in advising startups via the accelerator program that I run here, board of director assignments, and advisory gigs that I take on from time to time. I mentioned I'm an avid publisher of startup advice and educational content. I've got 150 or so articles on that SHOCKWAVE Innovations website. I produced a video library called Founders Academy. The same content that you're going to see me give lectures here, each of those is also a streaming video. We're going to cover about 17 of them in these 4 days. There's 50 of them in total. We've had more than 1,000 graduates of this Founders Academy since I've been doing them starting, I can't remember, 2.5, 3 years ago. And I've got a book that's coming out in October. It's on the topic of early stage fundraising. So I'm done with the manuscript. I'm working on cover design and all that fun stuff. So this is my first time through the journey of being an author of an actual book. But really, I stand here mostly with the gray in my hair and the scars in my back, and that's what I'm bringing mostly, I think, to this table. I don't have certifications or anything like that. My certifications are this gray hair and that gray hair and that gray hair and scars all over my body for my 29 years in the saddle as an operator. But I'm still having a lot of fun. And my mission for these Founders Academies really is to dramatically improve your odds of success. You guys know what the odds are of even making it to $1 million in revenue or making it maybe to a Series A round of funding. If that's the route that you choose to pursue, the odds are kind of against you. So if I can just improve those, it can make a dramatic difference. And then I have a personal goal. My personal goal is to deliver at least 2, hopefully more, aha moments to each of you every day. An aha moment to me isn't just something that you write down or type into your Evernote. You put 3 asterisks next to it or you highlight it in yellow. To me, that's an aha moment. Okay, something you want to make sure you reflect back on. So I've got a goal to deliver at least 2 of those each day to each of you. I see some familiar faces, so I am kind of curious who's here today. How many of you have been through all or part of my Founders Academy before? Raise your hand. Yeah? Awesome. Same to Dallas and Houston. We do usually have repeat participants. This is probably because there were some things we talked about the last time you went through this boot camp, either 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year ago, that weren't super important to you then, and now you want to hear it again because it is important to you. That happens quite often. Do we have any startup advisors or mentors here? Anybody advising startups? We might in Dallas or Houston. Welcome. Similar kind of thing, you know, as a mentor myself, there's certain aspects of businesses that I'm not a ninja to help on, and so I like getting educated on those, and I also like listening to how other mentors and advisors describe things, and I can selfishly learn from that and make that part of my toolkit. How many have a product launched in the market with some customers or users? Raise your hand. Yeah, Dallas and Houston too. Awesome. So you guys have a certain set of issues and concerns and opportunities you're dealing with that are different than those that haven't yet launched the product. And the content that I've picked for these 4 days is that subset of the full 50 lecture set that I have. And the subset should be of interest to all of you or almost all of you now or very soon. Anybody fundraising right now or getting ready for fundraising? Raise your hand. Yeah, here in this room it's about half. For those of Houston and Dallas, it was about half of the room here are fundraising or getting ready for it or seriously thinking about it. Day 4 is all about fundraising. So what I try to do in the first 3 days is kind of set the stage so that there's some building blocks and vocabulary in place so that on day 4, all we talk about is fundraising. Okay? All right, so I have to give a disclaimer. I'll give this once. I don't think I have it in the other lectures, but this way I can give it one time. I don't have a piece of paper that certifies me to do anything. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a licensed attorney. I'm not a certified financial planner or financial advisors. I don't carry any of those certificates. So I am a layman, and perhaps a layman that just has a few more years at it than you do. And so I stand before you not as a certified professional, but as a layman. The reason I mention this is we do talk about some financial topics, certainly fundraising topics. We talk about some legal matters. Those are so important that don't just take my advice on. Make sure to get advice and input from your CPA/accountant, your attorney, etc. Okay? A little bit about logistics. Feel free to bring your lunch. We open the doors at 11. I start the lectures promptly at 11:30. That gives you 30 minutes if you want to take advantage of our snacks. We've got some snacks and water in the back of the room, and you're welcome if you didn't happen to see those when you came in. Go ahead and hop up and grab a snack or a bottled water. But you're welcome to bring your lunch if you want to eat 11:15 before we start, or if you even want to eat 11:30. It's fine with me. I realize you all are busy, and this is 2 hours out of your busy day for 4 days in a row. I'll also apologize if I go over just a little bit on a couple of the days. I've done this enough times that we should be pretty close, but sometimes depending on the interaction or me just telling a story longer than I need to use to tell a story, we might go over by a few minutes, and you won't offend me if you do have a hard stop at 1:30 and need to leave. My commitment to you is to try and keep it on time because I don't want you to miss something. Okay? A little bit of kind of rules of engagement here. Asking questions, of course you're going to have questions. The lectures, each day I've got 4 or so lectures, so each of them is not terribly long. It's best if I handle questions at the end of each lecture, and I do have a question slide at the end. But if it's a burning question or if what I just said, doesn't match what's on the slide, don't hesitate to raise your hand. It's not going to bother me. But at the end of each lecture, I am gonna pause so we have a chance to take 2 or 3 questions before moving on to the next one. If you're on the live stream in Houston or Dallas, you've been given access to a Slack channel. That's the best for asking me questions while I'm giving the lecture. We have one of our staff members here in the audience that'll raise her hand and ask the question on behalf of those of you that are on the live stream. That email alias that you see, foundersacademy@capitalfactory.com, is not as good for real-time questions. That's more for things like, hey, I see that some people have a workbook that they printed out. I didn't get that. Could you send it to me? Right? So I created very short workbooks. It's got some of the key graphics and concepts, links to certain articles where if you want to go back and get a refresher on that topic, I have a link to my article on it. There was one for each day. We emailed that out last night, so if you registered this morning, or maybe you used a semi-bogus email or an email that you don't check very often for your registration, that's where you'll find it. Or if you registered this morning, just email foundersacademy@capitalfactory.com and we'll email you those workbooks. And I usually try and work my schedule so that I can stick around for 5 or 10, maybe 15 minutes at the end. If you have a personal question, if you have a question that's kind of unique to your business, or a question that's, you don't want everybody else to hear, just approach me at the end. I can usually stick around for a few minutes. Okay? And then last, I sometimes get asked, can you email us a copy of all of your slides? Well, it's copyrighted material that I use in a variety of different ways. I have a video library that is the same content, so that was part of the reason I put together that workbook. So unfortunately, I can't just email out all the slides. You're not going to offend me if you see something come up, and rather than take voracious notes, you snap a photo of the screen. That doesn't bother me. And just know that a large majority of the content that I'm describing here, the concepts that I'm describing, are in the articles that are on my Shockwave Innovations website. That was the foundation for then creating these lectures, which then became videos. And almost 100% of what's coming out of my mouth during these lectures is in my video library. If any of you decide you want my video library, there's 2 different versions of it. There's an essentials version, which is 15 of the lectures. It's pretty much what you're hearing today for the most part, or I'm sorry, over these 4 days. And then there's the complete set of the 50 videos, and you can find that on my website. If that's of interest to you, tomorrow make sure to pay attention to my scroll. You probably, when you came in, you saw some quotes and some stuff about sponsors. One of those, there's a promo code to get a discount off of my video library. So don't pay list price. If that's of interest to you, I want you to use that discount. Okay? That's the setup. Any questions before we jump in?
Actually, yes, I came late. What is your name?
My name is Gordon Doherty.
Perfect. Thank
Gordon
you.
Doherty. What else? Okay, so today is kind of some real foundation stuff. And then tomorrow we get a little bit more into customer acquisition and marketing and some things like that. Day 3 is around business development. I'm going to give you a peek into what acquisitions are like, and you might be wondering, why is Gordon telling me about acquisitions? Because I'm not planning on selling my company for 6 or 8 or 12 years when I can sell for $1 billion. Come back to that question. Hopefully there will be some very clear answers as to why I'm saying some things about setting the stage for a successful future acquisition exit. There's things that you should or should not be doing very specifically now to set the stage for a really good acquisition in the future. And day 4 is fundraising. So this is foundational, and it starts with developing your idea. And there's this myth, I think, that if we build it, they'll come, and that's not necessarily the case. Potentially they will, but I'd rather do a little bit more planning to ensure that if I build it, actually they will buy it or they will use it. And so in that way, I like to define idea development as really that upfront assessment of viability of your business. And you'll see I'll position kind of viability in a life cycle of a company, not even necessarily a highly scalable business, but just viable. Like, what are the odds, or what evidence do you have that the business plan that you're working against is going to lead to a viable company? To me, that's what idea development is. Up front, can we assess that to increase the odds that in fact that will be true? And because of what I just said, there are some of you, maybe a lot of you, that need to take your hands off the keyboard or soldering iron right now. You probably skipped past a first step of what I'm going to define as idea development. Or maybe you will conclude after this lecture that you did some, but maybe not enough, and maybe didn't cover enough areas. And it's one of those things that if we can adjust and adapt early, the earlier, the better. The later we adjust and adapt, the more painful it is, right? The more funding we wasted, the more bootstrapping of our own bank account, the longer we have to have that part-time job before we can get to our first customer or some fundraising. So if we're going to adjust and adapt, we want to do it as early as possible. And later as we adjust and adapt, we want those to be tweaks, not wholesale, complete change-outs of the business plan. So that's why I'm going through this and suggesting you might need to take your hands off the keyboard or soldering iron. And here's that life cycle I mentioned. You'll see some flavor of this in business books, MBA courses, and the like. This is the version that I like the best. And it's a viability life cycle that it actually goes beyond viability, but viability being a critical step along the way here. And the way I describe it is proving desirability is proving that people want it. Are you really solving a problem that the world cares to be solved? And then feasible is, can you build a solution that performs the desired function to solve that problem? And then viability is, can you come up with a customer acquisition model that results in the following equation. The lifetime value of a customer is considerably greater than the cost to acquire a customer. Not just barely greater than, because if the lifetime value of a customer is just barely more than the customer acquisition cost, then we're not left with any excess profit to pay for all the rest of the company. We've only funded the customer acquisition part of the company. And if we can at least get to viability, well, then usually funding opportunities start opening up, or maybe we become profitable enough we don't need funding. And then we get to find out, are we a scalable and or sustainable business? And I show scalable and then sustainable, but in reality, some ventures are determined to be sustainable, but not also scalable, right? It might become viable and sustainable, meaning it can operate for a long time. It's just not one of those rocket ship kind of things that can get really big. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about for that. And for some reason, when we use the words lifestyle business, it comes out of our mouth like naughty words or something. But I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong if you can build a sustainable business that employs 50 employees and you've got a fabulous culture and you're solving a problem that needs to be solved. It's not the kind of thing that you get to $100 million, okay? So this is the viability life cycle, and I'm probably going to come back to it one or two more times throughout the other lectures, which is why I want to cover it now. And the other reason I want to cover it now is because idea development tools that I'm going to talk about are mostly intended to help you figure out, are you building something that is desirable, meaning that it solves a problem the world wants to be solved, and viable. Can you acquire customers efficiently? There's only so much in the idea development that will get indications of viability, but it's desirability and viability that mostly we're trying to test for with the tools that I'm going to give you here. Okay? And the way I like to think about this is the very beginning. It goes back to your business plan. And I wrote an article titled, Your Initial Business Plan is Just a Huge List of Assumptions. When you were sitting in the coffee shop with the co-founder, what you guys were riffing on and wrote down on the napkin, which became a piece of paper, which became, a Google Doc, probably was a long list of assumptions, hypotheses that you were making that need to be true, or enough of them need to be true for you to have a viable business. And I like to write those down. And as I advise startups, if they haven't written them down, I like to ask them to write those down. What is it that you're assuming to be true in order for you to have a viable business? And the statements are simple as they start. The hard part is the second half, but I like to write them as we believe statements. We believe that, and then just start filling in the blanks. We believe this type of customer suffers from this type of problem. We believe we could build a solution that performs this function. We believe the competitive landscape looks like this. I mean, just cover all of the aspects of your business plan. And if, as you go through this, you find that you only have 5 or 10 assumptive statements, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. 20, 30. If one of you, tell me tomorrow that you have 40 or 50, that's awesome. I think kind of the more the better, because you can kind of get granular. And the way I want you to think about those assumption statements is the idea development process. A lot of it is intended to start putting check marks next to those. And so without even having the product and without even having paying customers, can you get indications that many of those assumption statements are true? You won't really know until the product is out there and customers are paying for it, but this is the purpose of the idea development phase. Test those as much as possible. Does that make sense? Okay. And then there are some tool sets that we can use, and one that's being used quite often now is design thinking. There's a methodology called design thinking. It's used in a variety of contexts, and we in entrepreneurship, we've kind of adopted it, and some people have adapted it a little bit more to our specific type of use. But design thinking is there to help you understand your customer. It was produced for different purposes than the way we use it, but the fundamental methodology can be really valuable. It's making that assessment before you do the real work. I don't have time to get into design thinking, and I'm actually not a ninja at design thinking. So if you agree with me on this, or if you're at least curious, you'll find white papers, you'll find YouTube videos, you'll find a lot of material. Of course, you're going to find books and whatnot, but if you want to adopt this, educate yourself a little bit more and use some of the tools for idea development from the design thinking methodology. Okay? And a lot about this, what I'm talking about, whether it's design thinking or some other method, because there are many other methods that can be used, you got to get out there and you have to talk to your prospective customers, who you believe your user or customer is. And I often get the question, you know, Gordon, how many customers or prospective customers do I need to talk to during this idea development phase? And I say, well, it's kind of a trick question. It depends. My way of thinking about it is, how many prospects do you need to talk to until you are pretty much getting the same responses from all of them, or enough of them to then figure out, 80% are giving me this answer, 20% are giving me these. What is it about these 80% versus those 20%? Because you might then redraw the lines around the 80% and then continue there. If the responses you're getting are all over the place with regards to the problem you're solving, or their alternatives to address that problem today, or whatever it is that's in your business plan, if you're getting different responses, then you need to keep talking to more customers, and you're going to have to refine, right? So keep going. And this is one of those where if you tell me you talk to a dozen customers, I say, no way, keep going. And if you tell me it's 100, like, okay, great, I feel better. You know, I sat with an entrepreneur that had already built this elegant looking product. It was a hardware product, and they talked to 3 customers. I wanted to absolutely kill him. Like, what are you doing? I mean, they spent a lot of time and money building this product, and they talked to 3 customers. And he was excited when I said, well, how do you know that, you know, the world suffers from that problem? And he told me, well, these 3 customers I talked to. I'm like, ah. Okay, so don't do that. This is the early stuff. And what you're looking for are what we call aha moments. I used it as a personal goal of mine, but aha moments, this is part of the design thinking nomenclature. What is it that you're discussing with these prospective customers that cause them to pound their fist on the table, or get animated, or speak louder, or their eyes get really big, right? Those are aha moments, and you really want to pay attention to those. And can you find similar those same kind of aha moments? Are you getting that similar reaction from a lot of others? And it's those aha moments, if you have a team, and it might just be you and a co-founder and a 3-person outsourced development team, but that's fine. Like, these aha moments are a lot of what your story is going to be built around. Even internally, the story that you're going to use with your co-founders and contractors and advisors, they become really, really important. And one way we get to these aha moments is by asking what are called open-ended questions. If any of you have been through sales training, you learned about open-ended questions. They're the opposite of closed-ended questions. And open-ended questions can't be answered with a simple yes or no, right? So if you lead the witness during your interviews by starting with, don't you agree that, and then you fill in the rest of the question, well, that could be a yes or no. And worse than yes or no, you're influencing them. You're injecting bias into it, so you don't want to do that. You want to ask questions like, how do you do this function? Tell me about a time when you, and then fill in the blank, right? So that allows the person that you're interviewing to kind of tell you stories, not just give you yes or no responses. This is why it's nearly impossible and not terribly effective to do your customer discovery and idea development via online surveys. Survey monkeys and poll daddies, probably, yeah, you can ask a lot of closed-ended questions. Check the box, yes or no, rate from 1 to 5. I'm not so sure. I think that's fine after you've done some legitimate face-to-face real interviews, and there's something you need to tease out a little bit more, and so you blast something out for a very specific purpose, but that is not doing legitimate and comprehensive customer discovery and idea development. Okay? It's just a tool that could complement. So as you're asking these questions, there's a lot you can figure out. Are you talking to the right customer? Meaning the right role, the right demographic, the right size of company, etc. Do they see the problem the same way you do? you need to be very careful, because you go into that interview with the customer or the prospect with a lot of bias. You hear yeses when they're saying either maybes or soft no's, and still somehow you hear a yes. You have to be really careful. But while you're out there talking to them, are there other problems that they experience in the same general area? You're talking to them about this, and as you're discussing it with them, there's other things that are right adjacent to that they also enlighten you on. That could be really interesting, and it doesn't mean you need to pivot there, although it could. It could be that this thing that's adjacent to the problem you thought you were going to solve is actually a much nastier problem and much more exciting. But even if not, those could become enhancements of your product, or it could become product number 2 or 3 in the future. So make sure to cover that. How do they deal with the problem? They have some method. It could be some manual or funky, inefficient kind of thing. Or is it another solution provider you're trying to displace? If you build something of the function you described, would they consider buying it? Of course, it's not a sales conversation, so don't turn this into a, great, I'm going to hit you up to buy it as soon as it's ready, right? So you don't want this to come across as a sales call, but you would like to get some indications on, hey, if you build this kind of thing, is that something they would entertain paying money for, assuming that you monetize your product in that way. I realize some of you are working on products that you monetize via, I don't know, advertising or other things. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that you want your interview to help you figure out. And I think it's hard to do that on the phone, although some of you might have the type of product and you do need to talk to 200 prospects, and it's hard to have 200 face-to-face meetings. But as much as possible, get out of your office and get into their office or into their environment. So if you're not selling to businesses, you're selling to consumers, go where your consumers are and engage them directly. They'll be more open, they're going to be more honest. There's other things you can discover, including watching how they do things. Okay, you can't do that on the phone. You can't say this on the phone. Hey, would you mind if I look over your shoulder as you close the monthly financial books? I'd like to see how you do that. Hey, would you show me that procedure that you do in the operating room? I'd like to witness you doing one. Hey, would you show me how you share that with your followers on social media, and then how you do this and how you do that? Whatever it is, hey, show me how you do it, especially on the workaround. So pertaining to the problem, if they have some other workaround or alternative, you need to know how they do that, and you can't do that on the phone. So hopefully you're going to do some combinations of real face-to-face and, yes, maybe also some phone interviews. Does that make sense? And then when you're done, don't just thank them for their time and shake their hand and give a business card. You have yet one final opportunity to recap what you heard, because in this way your bias can get corrected. So Gordon, what I heard you say was A, B, C, D, and E. And I go, no, D, that's not what I said. I said maybe. You said yes, okay? Or whatever that bias is, there's a chance to correct it, and that's really important. And it gives you a chance to, ask, well, hey, when I do build this, would you be interested in being one of my first beta testers? Okay, so you could even start building your early list of who wants to kick the tires once you've got something that's ready for that. Okay? With me? And a lot of what we're trying to find out in all of this is, are you building something that people desperately need or just something they want? There's a huge difference between need and want. You can read articles about selling a vitamin versus an aspirin. I have an article on it on my site as well. It's taught a lot in marketing and sales. But it's preferable if you're selling something that they desperately need, not just want. My 3 girls are now grown and out of the house, but if you ask any of them, is there a difference between need and want? They will recite that as a parent, I provided things that they needed, things that they wanted. They had to do odd jobs around the house, or maybe I went 50-50 with them, right? So there's a really big difference, and you want to figure out where are you on that continuum. And then some of you have an idea that's really evangelistic. It's really, really innovative. It's out there, which means the world might not quite realize they suffer from the problem. Really innovative solutions sometimes are hard to do this idea development and customer discovery. You still have the obligation, but you might find that you get some blank stares. If you're really out there on something like, no, I don't have that big of a problem getting to work. I can drive my car, I can, take the bus, I could maybe take the train. And so you're pitching me on this concept of ride sharing basically, 15 years ago or 12 years ago, and you're asking me questions that are essentially, you're hoping lead to a ride sharing solution. And if you were even then to describe the solution, like, no, Gordon, you're gonna bring up an app and you're just gonna like tell them where you are, and some stranger's gonna drive up and open the door and you just jump in and they're gonna take you somewhere. I probably would tell you you're crazy. But now that we see it, now that we do it, it's kind of like, it's obvious. Some things aren't obvious, and I don't have a great answer for you other than just do as much of this as you can if you fit that bill. Okay? So far, what I've talked about mostly is around testing for desirability and some hints of viability. And while we're at it, let's just talk about feasibility. This is going to be a little bit different. You've got, lean startup and some other methodologies that you can use for feasibility. But you know that in the early days, you don't build the elegant solution. This is why I wanted to choke this entrepreneur that built this beautiful hardware product. There was almost nothing in between. Like, why didn't you build the crappy, ugly, expensive, slow, and buggy version of it first and kind of get it out there to the zealots that really are suffering from that problem to figure out, are you pointed in the right direction? This is the minimum viable product, right? And the key in that is it needs to be viable enough to at least kind of test your theories, and then within viability, you want it to be as minimal as possible. This might be the earliest days of Google Glass, for example. But maybe it works. It's just ugly and clunky and buggy and probably costs 10 times more than anybody would pay. But hey, it might be enough as a minimum viable product to test the market. I love this graphic. I didn't invent it. I found it. But minimum viable products, if your objective is to build a solution that allows getting from point A to point B, a wheel doesn't do it, and two wheels on an axle doesn't do it, and a frame of a car with no steering wheel and no engine, that doesn't do it, right? So the first time you get a viable offering to test for the need to get from point A to point B is number 4 in the top. But down on the bottom, if you start with a skateboard, well, hey, a skateboard gets us from point A to point B. It's not going to get me from here to Dallas, but it'll get me from here to the other side of downtown. And then as we evolve, we're a scooter, and then we're a bike. Oh, well, a bike, I can go miles on a bike. And then a motorcycle, yeah, I could get to Dallas on a motorcycle. If it's raining, that's not great. But my ultimate solution is some type of automobile. So you get the idea. The V in MVP is important if you're going to get the right feedback for can I build it and does the world want it. Okay? So homework assignment, I'll give out a couple of these, or these are just suggested homework assignments. Write down those business plan assumptions. What assumptions are you making? What 20, 30, 40 we believe statements could you write out? And if you're already at a minimum viable product stage, or you've already launched your product, well, which of those could you put check marks by? And is it just like a little miniature check mark because you have maybe some indications, or is it like check, got it? And this will kind of give you an assessment of where you are. As an investor, actually, whether I ask you the questions this way or not, that's part of what I'm doing. As I interrogate you and perform my due diligence on your opportunity, I'm trying to figure out what have you already figured out versus what is left to be figured out. And is my money going to be going towards still figuring some things out or just scaling the business? Okay. And if you don't speak in this language, I think you might have a conversation that you think is a good conversation with the investor, but whoop, not really. Okay? How far along are you? How much has been validated? And then if you haven't done very much in the way of customer discovery in those interviews, stop what you're doing and go do a bunch of them. All right, what questions y'all have about idea development? I realize some of this you've read about, some of you are kind of past this, but I got to start with a level foundation. Yes, sir?
So Gordon, when you talked about the difference between need and want, would you describe Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple as wants or needs?
Well, it depends on your period of time. If I go back to 2000 or whenever I kind of remember Google coming out, it's like, yeah, I mean, our life didn't center around that, right? So sometimes we start out and it's kind of a want, a nice to have, and then later because lifestyle or other things that become connected to it, it becomes a need. So I think that's fine. If it starts out as a want, but you see a way to have it become a need, that's fine. It starts off as a vitamin, becomes an aspirin, and then becomes crack cocaine, it might be how it goes. Coca-Cola. All right. All right. So now let's take that and let's dive into a couple other topics. Elevator pitch. Your elevator pitch is going to be one of your most important tools. And in this way, I'm not talking about the stand on stage for 90 seconds. We do sometimes call those an elevator pitch. I'm talking about the even shorter, very, very short version of it. Why? It's because there's been a lot of research that the non-task-oriented human gives you their attention span for about 8 seconds. Okay? That's not very long. And so the way I like to think about it is you and I step on the elevator together in this building on the ground floor, and we're coming up to the 16th floor. And I've never timed it, but I bet you it's probably around 8 seconds, right? 6 to 10 seconds, so let's just call it 8. So this is a perfect test case. We get on the elevator together, and you say, hey, I recognize you. Are you Gordon from Capital Factory? And I say, yeah, what's your name? And you say, oh, my name's Jill. Hey, Jill, how are you? Great. So, well, what are you working on, Jill? And Jill says, oh, I'm working on a startup called SHOCKWAVE VR. And just as the doors start to close, I say, huh, what's SHOCKWAVE VR? What comes out of your mouth in 8 seconds before we reach the 16th floor and the doors open? Okay? What comes out of your mouth will result in a binary outcome. I will take a right step out of the elevator, and then with my left foot, what do I do? If my left foot moves forward and subsequent steps carry me forward, I'm going to the kitchen or the bathroom, and I turn around and say, hey, nice to meet you, best of luck. Or my left foot moves to the side, and I turn and pivot, and I say, that's interesting, and I ask any question. So do I go to the bathroom, or do I ask a question? It's as simple as that. Your elevator pitch, you know what you want it to do, right? You want it to cause me to ask a question. So I like to think of the elevator pitch as 1 to 2 sentences, probably a couple of sentences that describes who are you solving a problem for, what's the problem you solve, and why should someone care, the benefits they receive. And I'll give you some methodologies. I've got an article on this titled, Your Elevator Pitch Only Needs to Accomplish One Thing, right? It's that binary outcome. And I say that one thing, the only thing that matters about your elevator pitch is did it generate enough interest to ask any question? I don't care what the question is, because if I step to the left and ask you a question, guess what? Now we're going to talk for 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And if we talk for 30 seconds to 2 minutes, you can tell me more. And if there's still excitement, then a business card exchange happens, and we're grabbing coffee a week later, right? So that's how binary it is. And it's just a door opener. Some entrepreneurs, as we work with them on their 2-sentence elevator pitch, they're trying to jam everything in it. They think they have to tell almost their whole story. Like, no, you just need to say enough that causes a question to be asked, because then you can tell the rest of your story. And it's just a door opener. Your elevator pitch is not going to get you funded. A crappy elevator pitch causes me to go to the bathroom or the break room, right? So it can be in your way of getting funded, but it's not going to get you funded alone. So the way I like to think about it is what we do and why someone should care. So if you can stitch together a couple of sentences, there's a lot of different formats, and this doesn't always work, but I like to give a framework to start with. So what do we do? Why does someone care? And one way to think about this, and this might end up being 2 sentences, but this is from my friend and Capital Factory colleague, Mikey Trafton. We help customers solve problem for benefit. And of course, the pieces in the parentheses you need to replace with something that's meaningful for you. But maybe this provides a framework for just getting started. And this might just be the first sentence, or it might drift into 2 sentences, but we help customers solve problem for benefit. Okay? And then the why someone should care, I like to get to the real so what. Like, really so what? So making a bold claim or some prediction, if you can quantify, sometimes that'll help catch attention. I'm going to give you some examples. And a lot of times I find that it's this why someone should care part of your elevator pitch that causes the question. Okay? And let me give you a couple examples. This is SHOCKWAVE Innovations. SHOCKWAVE Innovations helps educate, advise, and fund tech startups so they can maximize their odds of success. In fact, one startup we helped during their founding days reached $80 million in revenue and a NASDAQ IPO. Okay? So of that, it's probably the second sentence that might cause you to ask me a question, right? Wow, who's that startup? Wow, what was their valuation? How long ago was it? Did they go public on NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange? Or I don't, any question about that could be good, okay? True statement too. So it's better if your elevator pitch has some truth to it. So here's another one, company I got engaged with for a while called Nuve. Nuve helps transportation companies protect against fuel and cargo theft for increased profitability. Our solution's built on hardware sensors and is so effective that the third largest transportation company in Mexico saves $100,000 a month in fuel costs. Again, it's probably the second sentence that is generating that question. Like, wait. Drivers steal fuel? What is fuel theft? And now I get to tell you about how in the developing world, yes, drivers of 18-wheelers do absolutely pull over the side of the road and siphon about 30 liters of diesel fuel and sell it on the black market to make a little extra money. Okay? You might say, wow, what company is that? Mexico? Do you have a operation in Mexico? Right. Any of those are fine because you step to the left and we got to talk. Last one. We'll use this case study and some other parts of this. But welcome to Doggy Drone. Doggy Drone enables dog owners to take their dog on a walk around the neighborhood without ever leaving their house. You select the distance, speed, and route, then let the drone do the rest while you watch on your mobile device. Obviously a dumb idea. But if I delivered that, like, you ask me, hey, so what are you working on? I said, oh, a company called Doggy Drone. Well, what's Doggy Drone? If I deliver those two sentences, you can't help but ask me a question. Do you agree? You're going to ask me a question, right? So we'll talk about Doggy Drone later. You get the idea. These are in that article titled, Your Elevator Pitch Only Needs to Accomplish One Thing, if you think it's helpful. Let's see. Once you get your elevator pitch, take it out for a test drive, right? This is an iterative process, like a lot of your messaging and marketing and whatnot. Test it with 20 people that don't really know a lot about what you're working on. It's okay if they know the name of your company, but the more they know, the more tainted they are, and it's not going to be a valid test drive. You can test it with random people. For example, tomorrow when you show up at 11:15 to eat your snack, why don't you test it on the person to your left and right and in front and back? I bet you if you're a driven founder, you can test drive it with 20 people just in this week, right? If you come up with something tonight, and then what you're looking for is what reaction do you get? You can even, what I like to do is like, hey, can we do a quick elevator pitch test? Yeah, okay, great. Ask me what I do, and then I'm going to tell you, right? So you ask me, hey, so what do you do? And I spout it out, and then I ask them just what question comes to your mind, and then don't answer their question, right? Just what question would come to mind, from that elevator pitch? Okay, great, thanks. What do you think I do? What do you think we do? So this is another interesting test. Is just off those two sentences, what is the perception of the solution that you're providing and the problem you're solving, just from two sentences? And that's part of the test drive. Are they way over here when you wanted them to be closer to here, or are they kind of in the right range? Are the questions they're thinking about asking you, are those the kinds of questions you would love to kind of address as Gordon steps to the left off the elevator instead of going to the bathroom? That's the test drive. Does that make sense so far? Okay. And then you might end up with a couple versions of this. So when you step on the elevator with me, and if you know who I am, you might be thinking, Capital Factory Fund, maybe they'll be an investor someday. So you're thinking, elevator pitch for investor might be different than I'm the senior vice president of a company that might be a good strategic partner for you, right? There might be a tweak if the elevator pitch is with a strategic partner prospect versus an investor prospect or a customer prospect. It's not going to be a totally different elevator pitch, but maybe a couple words you swap out. So don't be paralyzed by that. And then once you get one and you test drive it and you're feeling reasonably good about it, evangelize it. Every co-founder and employee must memorize the elevator pitch. It's too important. You know, we all go to meetups. We're going to cocktail parties. We're going to other events where we're mixing and mingling with other founders and investors and prospective business partners. Why wouldn't your 2 other co-founders and your 1 or 2 employees also know the elevator pitch? So I did this regularly. When I was an operator, I would just randomly, when we do an all-hands meeting, even if it's just like 5 of us or 12 of us, it doesn't matter, I would just randomly, you know, I'd be talking about something. I'd say, oh, by the way, Brittany, what's our elevator pitch? She probably stumbles the first time. Then everybody gets it. Like, no, this is important to Gordon. Everybody needs to know the elevator pitch. So the next all-hand meeting, when I say, hey, Megan, what's our elevator pitch? Boom. And it's not critical that they get exactly perfect, but perfect is ideal. And now you've got 3 constituents, 5 constituents out in the market carrying your message via the elevator pitch. So if they get asked at a cocktail party, oh, so what's SHOCKWAVE VR? Boom. They're delivering the right elevator pitch. I think it's that fundamental, that important. And it'll change over time. So remember, as you tweak it, your employees need to know that it's slightly different. Okay? So your homework assignment is probably obvious. If you don't already have a 8-second elevator pitch, write one out and take it out for a test drive. Test drive it tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday when you show up a little bit early or stay a little late. Questions on that? Pretty straightforward? Yeah? All right. So now we've covered idea development and some elevator pitch. Another key part of your business plan is going to be the size of your market. So I want to talk about market sizing. You're going to get asked a lot about this. This is something that I think you should do as early as possible. I mean, fresh out of the coffee shop with just the first few list of assumptions, you should be trying to size your market. And you'll see why here in a second. It's fundamental to your business plan, and because of that, it's really important to getting investment. So if any of you, or for those of you that are planning on getting your venture funded at some point, this topic of market size is going to become really important. And that's because the size of your market suggests the upper limit of how big you could grow, right? At least without doing some dramatic things. As you add new products, as you do other things, yes, your market size might change, and you'll see why that's the case as I define a couple different market size terms. But this is why investors care. If the total market that you're addressing is $50 million, I realize that's a kind of a big number, but that means even if you got 100% of that market share, you're only a $50 million company, and you're not going to get 100% market share, right? So I often get asked, well, Gordon, how big does my market size need to be? Just tell me the answer, and then I'll come up with the mathematics to get there if I have to. Well, this is a really tough question, but as a general rule, venture-style investors, including maybe some active angel investors, would like to see a $ and a number and a capital B. Something, a billion or billions. Doesn't mean it has to be 100 billion. Sometimes we come up with market sizes that are so ridiculously large it discredits you. Like, oh, our market size is $8.2 trillion. And, okay, I don't think so, but okay. So if we could get to something that has a B, that's nice. If you come up and it's $500 million or $600 million, that doesn't mean you're not going to get funded, okay? But a lot of times what we're doing is we're trying to figure out, okay, then, shoot, that market's only $250 million. Let's see, what would we need to do to get it to $1 billion? Well, if we did this and we did this, then it would be, $1 billion. So, we'll talk about this in just a second. You'll see where this comes in. And part of this comes down to market share. I mentioned if your market size is only 50 million, you're not going to get 100% share of a market. So let's look at these. If your total available market is $10 billion, if you capture just 2% of that $10 billion market, you're a $200 million company. But if your total available market is only $250 million, you have to go get 80% of that same market to be a $200 million company, right? And it's usually a lot easier to get 2% than it is to get 80% of a market. I realize there are different dynamics in markets, but And then the other thing that we like as operators and as investors with large markets is the larger the market is, the more options you have. You have optionality. And the metaphor to use here is, you know, you first go through that door on the left, and you think that's the path for the company, and you go into a hallway, and then there's other doors. Oh boy, it's not working out very well. There's a lot of rattlesnakes and alligators, and I need to go somewhere else. Well, if that's your only market, like if that is the market, you're going to get eaten by alligators and rattlesnakes. So instead, though, if your market is huge, you might be able to come back out and go into another door. So this would be like a broad market with certain sub-markets or sub-segments that might be adjacent. So it gives us pivoting opportunities to adjacent markets that might be more interesting and more attractive. And this is what usually comes with really, really large markets, and the investors like that for that reason. Yeah?
If you had recurring revenue for like either it's a disposable or a service or whatever, would you say that over the course, your market be over the course of a year, 5 years, 10 years?
Thank you. I've got it on a slide, but I'll address the question right now. Instead of doing it the way I'm gonna teach you here, you would probably express it on an annual basis. And of course, if you're going to say your market size on an annual basis, then it's less important that it has a B at the end of it, right? If your total available market is $220 million per year or $475 million per year, well, that sounds pretty attractive and maybe almost equivalent to another market that is not a recurring style, and the total available market is $2.6 billion. Yeah. And I've talked about the size of the market, but realize it's not just the size of the market. As you're doing this market sizing analysis, there are other attributes of your market that are really important to you and your prospective investor. Is it a market that's being innovated and disrupted? This is a market that's undergoing transformation. That's interesting, because markets that are being innovated and transformed leave opportunities for small, fragile, scrappy-driven startups to crack into. Is the market growing? It's nice if the big market's growing, but even if the sub-segment, if the door that you're going into, yeah, that part of the market is growing like crazy, even though the big whole market's not. And are there levels of concentration, or is it a fragmented market? Is this a market where there are 3 giants that command 88.5% of all market share? That's a concentrated market, which means you're going to have to go slay one of those to crack in and get some interesting share. Or is it a fragmented market? Is one of these markets where, no, there's 20 players. To get up to 80% share, yeah, you got to go down to number 12 or 20 in the vendor list. Fragmented markets are often easier to crack into if you're a scrappy-driven startup. Okay? So these are some of the attributes. So size plus interesting attributes. So this means that ideal markets are huge in size. They're growing rapidly, at least the subsegment that you're focused on. They're dynamic in some way, meaning they're being transformed, and they're available for entry. If you could cobble together all 4 of these, wow, that's awesome. This probably won't be the case, but if you could combine huge plus at least one of the others, I'd say that would be a goal. Huge in size plus one other, I think, gives you a good story around your market size. We're gonna go through the formulas on sizing, but let me just pause there to see if I've already conjured any questions. Okay, so let's size the market. I need to define a couple terms. One is called TAM. It's the total available market. And many founders misunderstand TAM, so I need to be specific with you here. And I do have an article titled "Sizing Your Market," and I've linked to it in the workbook that we sent out. There's a link to that article, I'm sure. How big would you be? How big would your company be if you sold your offering to every single constituent in your broad market? Okay? They don't have to be a perfect customer, but you have to at least be able to squint your eyes and say that, yeah, they could reasonably be a customer. Okay? So we don't do a lot of filtering when we do total available market. But do you see here, it's how big would you be? So I'll say this a different way. Some of you will make a mistake when you go build the doggy drone business, and you'll tell me, Gordon, the size of our market is $4.8 billion. I say, really? How'd you come up with that number? No, That's how much is sold every year in pet accessories and pet supplies. And I say, that's not your total available market. That's how much is spent every year on your category of products. Instead, I want to know what's your available market. If you go capture 100% of what you characterize as your market, how big would you be? Okay? And I'll give you, we're going to do a test, we're going to do a case study on this. But I need to define a cousin of TAM. TAM's cousin is SAM, the serviceable market, serviceable available market, but we shorten it to just serviceable market. This is the subset of your TAM that you're currently able to address or serve with both your solution and your business model. There are inherent limitations that preclude you from selling your product to every constituent in the market that you think is a reasonable constituent. And so when we do the serviceable, we narrow it down and we apply some filters. And some filters that we might apply are some that are on this list. Maybe there's certain geographic reach. You only sell your product in the US. You're only certified to sell it in the US, or you only have distributors in the US, right? So we need to narrow it. Maybe it's only available in English language, and the parts of the world that aren't proficient enough in English to use your product, well, that's not a part of your serviceable market. You'll have to go do translations of your product before they can become customers. Maybe there's something about your buyer or user demographic that right now it's only usable by people of this age or something about their demographic. Maybe it's only available on Android, not iOS, right? You can't count every cell phone in the world, not every smartphone, only the Android phones. Okay? Certain verticals, certain sizes of companies. This is only, there's no enterprise that's ever going to buy this. There's no way. It doesn't comply with these things that they require. This is, right now, it's only for medium-sized businesses. So your TAM might be companies of all size. Your SAM filters it down. And we'll go through one of these. Does this make sense, the concept of TAM and SAM? So because of what I just said, your TAM is not really going to change very much at all. It might change as the market grows. It could change as something changes fundamentally to your product that addresses a whole new market. But for the most part, your TAM is going to stay similar. Might grow very slowly, but your SAM might change a lot. As you address those limitations, you start removing some of those filters. Oh yeah, your SAM could change quite a bit. So that's TAM and SAM. The third one that's a little less about market size, but comes into this discussion about your market. Tell me about your market, would be your target market. We often will call it a beachhead. So, yep, got it, understand your SAM, it's for these, types and these whatevers, but like, as you spend my investment dollars on marketing, where are you directing those dollars? So this is even more focused usually than your serviceable market. It's where are you devoting your resources? So my example here is, our target market is the financial services industry, women 25 to 39 with young children. Okay, that's an example. Okay, so if you were to diagram this, it might look something like this. Your SAM is always or almost always smaller than your TAM, and your target market is always or almost always smaller than your serviceable market. But there's no predefined shapes on those. It might look more like that, right? But conceptually, this is how you think about it. Okay? So let's do one. Let's size the market for doggy drone, and let's talk about attributes and evolution of the market size for doggy drone. Well, first let's do the TAM for doggy drone. I had to do some research, and I figured out there's 30 million families around the world that have pet dogs, one or more. Assumption there is, if you have 2 dogs, doesn't mean you're going to buy 2 doggy drones, just probably going to buy 1, right? So that's my assumption here. 30 million families globally have dogs, and I'm going to price doggy drone at $500. So the TAM is pretty simple. Those 30 million all buy a doggy drone, it's a $15 billion market. Doggy drone's TAM is $15 billion. Okay, anybody disagree? But now we need to filter it. Let's go get the SAM. Turns out I only have retail distribution in the United States, even within the United States, these concepts of drones that will walk your dog, it's only legal in 20 states currently. And our engineers were only able to come up with propellers and motors strong enough to support dogs less than 25 pounds. So your German Shepherd and your Labrador, that ain't happening. Little Fifi is fine, okay? But as a result of doing that, it's not 30 million households now. It's only US, only 20 states, and only those that own dogs less than 25 pounds. It's 1 million households. So now you can see the serviceable market is $500 million. 1 million homes times $500. See how I did that? Pretty simple. Now let's think about what might the beachhead market or the target markets be. Who might be good for doggy drone? Any thoughts? Busy people?
People live downtown and have to take their dogs to work.
Downtown? A couple I thought of would be, well, one, only the US states where it's legal. No sense in marketing in Wyoming if it's not legal in Wyoming, so I'm not gonna, that's not a beachhead market, so it's those 20 states. I thought, well, $500, that's not a cheap toy. So maybe it's upper class, they've got some money to throw around or something like that. And then the one I thought might be interesting to riff on a little bit is the elderly. The elderly. Especially if they're living on by themselves and they want to live in their home, what we call aging in place, right? They have that companionship, but unfortunately, you know, my mother is not able to get out and walk the dog. She's got a bad hip, but the dog needs to go out, and she can't pay the neighbor kids because the neighbor kids aren't that reliable, and they want to charge her $10 every time. $10 twice a day times 30, yikes, that's expensive, right? So maybe there's an interesting angle on the elderly. So I think any of those are good for target markets. And I need to, so that's doggy drone, okay? You with me on that? We'll vary it in a little bit. And if doggy drone, it was an upfront purchase, it was $500, thank you very much. Instead, if I had done a subscription on doggy drone, don't give me $500, just pay me $20, you know, $19.99 a month. I would price doggy drone differently, okay? For example, $625 million per year, to the question that we got earlier. So let's think about how we could expand the TAM for doggy drone. One way I could expand the TAM is it's $500 plus the professional version or the enhanced or advanced version of the mobile app costs $1.99 a month. So it's $500 plus $1.99 a month. Then it would be $15 billion plus $716 million per year. Okay, so there I did kind of a hybrid. I could have switched the whole thing over to subscription, but I wanted to show you a hybrid. And so that's how the TAM might expand. For the SAM, well, maybe over time, more states than just the 20 pass legislation that allows dog walking drones. In fact, if I got enough funding, I might actually tell the investors, look, I want to raise $10 million because I'm going to take $4 million of that and I'm going to go hire people to go, you know, work the legislature to try and pass laws because it's in my benefit. I'm expanding my SAM as a result. Well, maybe I take it down to Latin America, or maybe I take it to Asia or Europe if it's legal, right? I could do geographic expansion. That would expand my serviceable market. And then my engineers are working on a second version of doggy drone that can handle dogs up to 65 pounds. Wow, that captures a lot more dogs. So you might think of some other ideas, but these are some possible ways for expanding your serviceable market. Okay, does that exercise help you a little bit? I know you're translating to your business. I realize some of you have different types of business models, so I want to cover some others that aren't, you know, those were kind of more mainstream. Product purchase, product subscription. Some of you are working on an online marketplace. Your business model is a marketplace, a supply side and a demand side of your marketplace. Well, in this case, you might have other metrics, not just revenue. You might have a thing called GMV. You might think of it as transaction volume. So this is the flow of transactions through your platform. And sometimes we'll hear marketplace founders say, yeah, we did $48,000 last month. And if I know they're a marketplace, I say, was that your transaction volume or is that the revenue that went to your P&L? Like, oh, that was the transaction volume. We get 10% of all transactions. Oh, so your revenue was $4,800. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so your revenue is $4,800. Your transaction volume or GMV is $48,000. It's not that $48,000 is a meaningless number. It's just some of you will discredit yourself a little bit by characterizing that as revenue. And when I hear you exaggerating like that, then the previous 4 statements that you made, I might assume that you're exaggerating on those as well. But what this means is you might have multiple market sizes. You might need to size the demand side separate from the supply side, or you might have GMV and revenue, right? So there's just a little extra complexity. And I mentioned this before when I said if I told you the size of the doggy drone market was, whatever I said, $1.5 trillion, and I was quoting how much was spent in the market, that's usually not related to your market size. It doesn't mean it's not an interesting figure, but your market size is only tied to market spend if your revenue metric is also tied to market spend. So for example, if you have a piece of technology that goes into the contactless payment device that's used in coffee shops, and you get 1/10 of 1 cent for every transaction that's made, or 1/10 of 1%. Well, now you can tell me how much is spent on coffee paid with contactless payments, and it makes sense that you're starting with a market spend figure because that's what your revenue is attached to. Most of you, it'll be different. It'll just be an interesting factoid. So for doggy drone, I think it's fine for me to say market size is whatever it was, $15 billion. You know, and Gordon, did you realize the world spends $1.5 trillion on dog accessories? What you're showing is a willingness of a market to spend money on a category of products. And so it can be an interesting figure, but it's one that complements your TAM and SAM and target market. Okay? Does that part make sense? Okay? Some of you might be working on a business plan where your monetization is not by the sale of your product, but by generating advertising revenue or selling your data. So users of your service, you collect millions of data points, and there are people that want to buy that. The methods I've described here are going to be a lot harder. You know, it's going to be harder for you to size your market. You're going to have to make a lot of assumptions. So if you have a mobile app for consumers and you're going to monetize with advertising revenue, you're going to have to make assumptions for what is the daily or weekly or monthly active usage of it, how many advertisers are you going to have, how much can you charge per whatever. So it's going to be a derivative formula, and that's okay. At least you still have a number. It's just you and I are going to have a dialogue for how do you think you're going to get to that much daily active use? We have that discussion. Okay. Why do you think people are going to pay you, 10 cents per click? We're going to have that discussion, right? That's all. Okay? Some of you, when you do the TAM, you're going to think too broad. You're going to go crazy. Like, I could have included domesticated pigs and cats and other domestic animals that might want to be walked around. But you know what? When I did dogs, and dog was really my target, I came up with 15 billion, so why go crazy? Right? I could have included those things, and I might have come up with a market that was $45 billion. So sometimes when we think too broad, it just gives a number that's so big, I lose credibility, right? So that does mean there's some manipulation and some judgment here, and absolutely that happens. Some of the workshops that I do with founders that have a market size that's too small, I'm trying to get creative with them, but creative in ways that aren't going to also discredit them. And you're going to need to make some assumptions. When I came up with 30 million families around the world, it's probably not a precise figure. The World Bank probably does not publish that figure, but I had to make some assumptions. Maybe some of the big markets, I was able to absolutely nail it. That's fine. Where you have to make assumptions because the data doesn't exist, later try and validate that. This is a conversation you're having with, usually it's the investor that cares about your market size, so it's all part of a conversation. And speaking about investors, when you're talking to them, make sure you're clear on what market you're describing. If I'm telling you my SAM, but you think I'm telling you my TAM, you're not very excited. But if I say my serviceable market, right? So what's your market size? You have a choice. Are you going to say the TAM or the SAM? And maybe both, but don't accidentally mismatch because of a misuse of vocabulary. And if you get challenged, pull out your spreadsheet. Gordon, I don't believe you. 15 billion, that's ridiculous. Like, okay, well, let me tell you my assumptions. Here's where I got this, here's where I got that. So don't fall on your sword, just have a discussion, have a dialogue. And it'll probably iterate as you have discussions with investors and they push back on that, like, Gordon, you're including domesticated pigs? Like, come on, man. Like, okay, I'll pull the pigs out. And then when you're talking to investors, remember, it's not just the size of the market, it's those other interesting attributes. So you're going to talk about those other things that we discussed. So a lot of times in your investor pitch deck, you'll have a slide or two about your market, slide or 2 or 3, and you'll combine kind of size and interesting attributes. It's your opportunity to educate the investor and hopefully get them excited about that aspect of your business plan. Does that help? Feel like you can do it, at least most of you? Some of you it's going to be really hard, some of you it's going to be easy, but it is an obligation if you're going to go the funding route. All right, let's go get some customers. I think this is the last topic. We're doing really good on time, so we're going to talk about customer acquisition strategies, strategies for acquiring customers. What is customer acquisition? Well, you're persuading someone to buy your stuff. Okay, that's customer acquisition. And it has a life cycle too. They can't buy from you if they can't find you. So there's a discovery phase of customer acquisition. And hopefully it's your ideal prospect that finds you, not the wrong target, but the right target finds you. They're probably finding you because your website or an app store listing or maybe in a retail store. And we do a lot of activities. We're going to talk about buyer persona development and things like that. But this is why we spend money to do search optimization, whether it's app store or website. You know, if they can't find us, then they can't buy our stuff. And then once they find you, then they can consider what you have to offer. They're in the consideration phase, and they're going to consume the information that you put out there. You're going to come up with value proposition. You're going to come up with a price. This is what a lot of this is content marketing. This is why we do those little explainer videos. So they find us, then they start consuming the messaging and the info that we put out there. And sometimes the consideration cycle is very short, sometimes it's very long. If you have a free app in the App Store and you monetize other ways, I mean, all of this, all the way from discover to transaction might happen in 45 seconds. If you sell a $500,000 piece of hardware into data centers of the Fortune 100, this consideration phase takes 6 months to a year. I sold into the federal government. I had the Army and the Navy as a customer. One of my deals took 2.5 years. So, you know, there's no preset length of time that consideration can take. It depends on a variety of factors. But then, you know, once they consider all you have to offer, they make a decision. If you're lucky, they'll transact and money's going to change hands. So that's the customer acquisition life cycle. And what we need to overlay on top of this is a method or a strategy for acquiring customers. And there's a range of methods or strategies for doing that. They can, for the most part, be dropped into 3 different categories: self-service, light touch, or heavy touch. Self-service is the way it sounds. There's no human intervention, right? You didn't take their smartphone and go find the App Store and click the buttons for them. They did it all on their own. Heavy touch is the opposite. Heavy touch is what I did when I sold to the Army. It took me 2.5 years and how many meetings and how many proposals and who knows what all happened. And light touch is where I call human assist. There is a human involved from your team, but they're more of in an assist mode as opposed to heavy hand-holding mode. And we'll talk about the attributes, but mainly I want to help you figure out which strategy might be appropriate for your offering. And the first tool that we use here is just simply the size of a typical deal. How much money is changing hands, either monthly or a one-time thing, the $500 for the doggy drone, etc. And there aren't numbers on this chart, meaning dollar figures for deal size, because this is like an abstraction. But very large deal sizes are almost always heavy touch. You're asking for $1 million? No, they're not going to just click on the website and say buy now, right? But if it's free or $1.99 or $100 a month or whatever, yeah, you're moving over to the small and very small. And of course, if you're in between, this is where it's oftentimes harder to figure out. So some of you, boom, you already got it. You know it's self-service or you know it's heavy touch. It's that in between that's a little bit more difficult. So let's double click on that part of it by adding another dimension to this. So now we have two axes that we're looking at. On the vertical is still that deal size, or a typical transaction. But now on the horizontal, I introduced the concept of complexity. And the complexity could be something about the solution itself, or something about the process involved to sell it. So it's solution complexity or sales process complexity, or both. And so as you can imagine, if you have a small deal size and high degrees of complexity, you're in the death zone. You can't come up with an efficient method of acquiring customers that results in that magic equation. Remember, lifetime value greater than customer acquisition cost? We can't get there, we die. And we know that small deal size with low levels of complexity, yeah, makes sense, those would be self-service. And large deal size with high degrees of complexity, that's going to be your heavy touch. And it's that light touch, again, that's sometimes, that's that combination of factors. Okay? I'm going to give some attributes here, but let me just pause to make sure this part makes sense. Okay? So I need to give you some ideas of complexity, because some of these might not be obvious. It might be your value proposition, just explaining why someone needs this. It's not obvious. So to try and have them go through an app store or go through your website and buy now, no, they don't quite get it. You have to talk to them until they can get it. It might be complexity of the value proposition. There might be some leap of faith or evangelism. The world doesn't quite know they even suffer from this problem. That's going to require some touch to help them understand that. It might be well understood, and it might not be a huge transaction size, but maybe there's a ton of competition in the market, and they're very aggressive. And if you don't talk to them, the odds are too high. They're just going to click and go with someone else. You're pricing a little bit higher, and you have to explain to them why you're worth a little bit more. The competition. Maybe you need to hold their hand during the trial or some proof of concept. When they put this in the lab, it's not just open it up, hit run, and play around with it. No, someone from your team has to be involved a little bit to get it installed, configured, help them interpret the data, right? If you've got someone on your team that has the title sales engineer or professional services, that's on their business card, yeah, you're in this level of complexity probably. It might be something about their decision-making process. Maybe their decisions involve a committee. There's representatives from the Network Operations Center and the security group and the applications management group, and they all have to come together and agree. That's a level of complexity that even if you're not charging a ton of money, their decision-making process is complex, and maybe the negotiations are pretty involved. This is why when we sell to large enterprises, they always demand a discount, and they're going to want to use their contract, not our contract. So these are the kind of things that I'm talking about. So sometimes it's just the dollar size or the deal size. Other times, no, the deal size might not be huge, but it's something else on this list that drives you towards a light touch or a heavier touch than you otherwise would be able to get away with. Okay? You with me on that? And sometimes we start out at one point on this grid, but we move. It moves because some complexity is removed, or so we can move. Actually, we can move the opposite direction. We might start off in a very evangelistic market and something like that, so we're a heavy touch. But over time, the world understands that problem and whatnot, and we move to a light touch or light to self-service. Oftentimes I see it the opposite. I see it going like this, and that is you build a fairly simple product you don't charge a lot of money for, you're selling it to small, medium businesses, and then over time you add some interesting goodies to it, and you can charge more, and you can go after a larger customer, a larger deal size. So you started out light touch and evolved to heavy touch, or self-service to light touch. It's also possible, usually not desirable in the early days, to live in two of these at once. I have a self-service offering that I charge $79 a month for, and I have a light touch offering for a slightly different target customer that I charge $1,000 a month for. Okay? I mean, on paper it's very viable. It's just you will learn soon that customer acquisition comes with implications of the tools you use, the processes that you use, the velocity that you move at, the KPIs and other metrics that you're analyzing. So as a young team, early in your evolution, I'm going to say even up to a couple $1 million in revenue, usually we like to get one flywheel going really fast and really efficient before we start adding other flywheels into the equation. Too many flywheels can cause, chaos. So usually it's okay if we evolve from self-service to light touch, but that usually means we leave self-service behind, and for a good reason. Or maybe you're big enough that at some point down the road, when you're $10 million, you're gonna add another one of these. Okay? All right, so let's do a little comparison here. General rule of thumb, self-service, oftentimes the target customer are consumers and small, medium businesses, more on the small than the medium. Mobile apps and simple web apps oftentimes fit there, and in the tens or maybe low hundreds of dollars per month if it's a subscription offering. General rule of thumb. Don't just take this and go tell your investor, Gordon said so. Just very broad rule of thumb. Light touch, well, a lot of times light touch offerings, we use light touch methods when we sell into the small, medium business market. Any type of solution, but now we're getting into the hundreds or low thousands of dollars. And we don't have to send a sales rep to their location necessarily, but we do need to interact with them. And then heavy touch, we kind of talked about those. Big ticket items, enterprise, almost always those involve this heavy touch. And so let's go back to the life cycle to say, like, okay, got it, so what does this mean to the company that we build and the capabilities that you have? Well, if it's self-service, you don't have a sales function. There's nobody with a business card that says sales representative or sales VP, right? It's all about marketing. Your marketing team is responsible for the discovery phase, the consideration phase, the decision. They push them all the way to the shopping cart, right? And so you do a lot of review of conversion rate metrics. That's what it's all about. It's about volume, it's about velocity, it's about conversions. But if we move up to light touch, now the marketing team is still critical. Marketing still has to get our prospects to and through the discovery phase and to and through much of the consideration phase, but then towards the end of that consideration phase, someone that usually has an inside sales title of some sort gets engaged, okay? And that inside sales function gets them past the last part of the consideration phase and through the decision. And then maybe they pass them off to e-commerce or something. And you see all of a sudden now this web chat rep showed up. Web chat can be a very effective and efficient function for light touch, and even you'll see heavy touch. And you see where I've situated. I've purposely situated it in that consideration phase. And this is because when we're considering an offering, we're cool to watch a short explainer video and read a case study or those kind of things. But oftentimes we don't want to talk to a human being. We're nervous that they're going to say the magic words and we're going to buy something that we don't want to buy. And maybe we're too polite and we don't want to hang up on them if this is not a conversation I want to have. But that web chat rep, they're just a mouse click away from being gone, and we don't feel guilty about clicking that X and just boop, I don't know who that person was, click, you're gone. So web chat, you can push that into the earlier and mid stage of consideration before those prospects are interested or willing to talk to your quota carrying salesperson that's just trying to get a deal done. So think about including that. They're low-cost resources. They don't have to always be on. You as the founder can be the first web chat rep. Wow, how valuable are those interactions when you're early in the company's evolution? And when I say inside sales, if we have a light touch acquisition model, the inside sales function is mostly transactional. You should be thinking single call close, not they're talking to the prospect 10 times. That's a little heavier than I think of when I think of light touch. Light touch, transactional, single call close. They're not having to do a lot of consulting. They're answering some mostly basic questions. Okay, so now let's move to the kind of heavy touch. You still see that web chat rep as a possibility for the consideration phase. And what you also see here is the sales team engages a little bit earlier. In the light touch, I suggested that the inside sales function engage towards the end of the consideration phase. In a heavy touch, they engage definitely earlier. Marketing might get them to the first part of the consideration phase, and whoom, here comes an inside sales rep, a field sales rep, a sales engineer. Oftentimes they'll work on a team. And this is just for efficiency, and that's a topic for another discussion. But as we get into inside sales and field sales now, it's not just conversion metrics for the marketing team we're looking at sales productivity metrics. What's the average sales cycle? What is the effectiveness of Gordon versus Kelly versus Megan? You know, deal size, sales cycles, shapes of pipeline, a lot goes into that when we get into having a sales function. I'm doing managing your sales function workshop in Houston in a week or two, and in Dallas next month for those of you that are interested. In this case, when we have a heavy touch, the sales function can get really, really active. This is a higher skilled individual than the inside sales for a light touch. In this case, this inside sales rep is doing demos, they're creating proposals, they're doing some objection handling, and so this inside sales rep is going to cost you more money, is one way to think about it, because you're hiring for a higher skill than an inside sales rep for a light touch function. One of the reasons I mention this is if you have a heavy touch acquisition model and you're looking for inside sales reps, you need to know what type of inside sales have they done in the past. Was it the light touch, transactional, single call close? I can answer about 12 questions and that's it. Or did they do heavy touch inside sales teamed with a field sales rep? Okay? If you want somebody that's already been there, done that, these are going to be some questions that you're going to be asking. Okay? You all with me? All right, a couple other thoughts as it relates to customer acquisition. I sometimes, when I ask, what's your customer acquisition strategy, I sometimes ask people about their pricing strategy and they tell me about their freemium or free trial offerings. And I say, no, those aren't pricing strategies. Those are customer acquisition methods. The reason we have the freemium version is because we want a subset of those, as many as possible, to upgrade to the paid version. So it's customer acquisition. Same for the free trial. The reason I let you try it for free for 2 weeks is I want a high percentage of you, hopefully, to convert to the paid version. So I contend that freemium and free trial offerings aren't pricing strategies, they're customer acquisition tools. So think of it that way. The reason I say think of it that way is there are metrics around this that are customer acquisition metrics, not pricing metrics. So everything I've talked about so far assumes that you are directly selling to your customer. Some of you have products that you will sell through third parties. We call it indirect customer acquisition. Maybe you sell through retailers, maybe distributors or resellers. Maybe you have a piece of core technology that is not a whole solution, but it does something wonderful, and you license it to other companies to embed inside their product that they take to market with their brand name and their price. Okay? These are all indirect methods of acquisition. It is a customer acquisition strategy. It's just someone else is the direct interface to the customer. You interface with your, let's just call them partners. So it's you to partner, partner to customer. This can be very efficient. It can do great and wonderful things. It introduces some complexities that we don't talk a lot about here. I have one of my videos is titled Distribution Channels, and I talk about some of the pros and cons of this. You lose some control, right? It's not your resources. It's not your salespeople. You can't hire them. You can't fire them. You can't tell them, spend more time on my product. They're selling 5 other products, right? But you spend a lot less. You know, they get a discount, but you don't have heavy operational costs. So those are just some pros and cons that you'll want to make sure if you're going to be taking your product to market via one of those methods, and if you've never done that before, you definitely want to get an advisor or a mentor that's been there and done that and can help you. A lot of mistakes are made thinking you just, oh, it's great, I'm going to sign up 5 resellers and they're going to go sell $1 kajillion. It's not that easy. Back to two-sided markets, these online marketplaces and sharing economy type solutions. In context of customer acquisition, you have 2. you have to acquire the supply side and you have to acquire the demand side. And you might use two totally different customer acquisition strategies for those. Maybe the supply side, you use light touch to go get the drivers, and you use self-service to go get those that are going to jump in the car and ride with them. So, you know, it is typical that it'll be a different method of customer acquisition for the supply side versus the demand side. You also have to figure out, are you gonna first go after acquiring the supply side or the demand side? There's that whole chicken and egg thing that goes on there. So I wanted to make mention of that for any of you that are working on marketplaces. Questions on customer acquisition? Pretty straightforward. Raise your hand if you're pretty sure you know which method. I'm not going to call on you, so don't worry. Raise your hand if you think you know if it's going to be self-service, light touch, or heavy touch. Okay, more than half, but some of you are still thinking about it. Okay, cool. Yes?
So it took away from the last slide you put up that talked about multi-site marketing. I'm glad you added that. And as you talked earlier about the staff, the inside sales staff that can do the light touch is not the same as the heavy touch. I'm assuming with multi-site or multi-site market, you can't really dual purpose those salespeople.
Oh, it's a good question. So the question was, for a two-sided marketplace, if you've got some level of touch, can you repurpose those that are acquiring the supply side versus the demand side? So we're assuming that both sides need some touch. I don't know. I don't immediately draw that conclusion. I could imagine there could be reasons to have them separate. So if both sides of the marketplace need light touch, let's say, I could see some efficiencies possibly for having these two people just acquire supply side and these three people just acquire demand side. But I also see some cases where some of you that have two-sided marketplaces, they're not purely online, meaning there's some local component to it. If you're Uber, you're not immediately worldwide. You got to go get drivers in each market, right? Or there's a company that I've helped called Candidly. They're an online marketplace for semi-professional and serious amateur photographers, right? Well, so you have to go find the photographers. So it's like if you have a statement that says, next we're going to launch, and then out of your mouth comes the name of some city, that means you have some local services component that makes you not immediately available everywhere. These have interesting dynamics because in those cases what we do is we have an activation period. We have to activate the market. We're going to Houston and we have this market activation playbook even. So when we go to a new market, we got to go get 30 photographers on the platform first. Once we get 30 photographers, then we go after these kind of events to try and get people to start consuming their service, right? So oftentimes there's an activation playbook for a market. And because that has a rhythm, it is possible that we're launching Houston, you have two inside salespeople, and all they're doing at first is getting the 30 photographers on the platform. And then after that, they're going after the demand, and then they split their time, or I don't know what it might be. So I don't conclude that there's one particular approach. I think it depends. Yeah. And for those of you that are working on marketplaces, I don't think I linked to this article, but I wrote one titled Expanding Beyond Your Home Market, especially for those of you that have that local services component. There's a way that we as investors like to hear you talk to us, and we'd like you to understand what the cost and the length of time is to activate a new market. And at the end of that, you get to what we call time to revenue. And then there's another period of time where we say time to break even. And there's a way of stacking up the launching of those new markets that leads to why you're raising a certain amount of money. So I just mentioned that for those of you that are doing marketplaces that have that services component. It's titled Expanding Beyond Your Home Market. Other questions? Yeah.
Within health tech, would you consider that the same kind of market strategy?
Within health tech, would I consider it the same market strategy? Tell me a little bit more. What do you mean? What is it about
like
health?
Just expanding what an investor would like to see, like what the cost of expansion beyond the local market or regional market would be, and then how you approach that for themselves. Is that a two-sided?
Got it. So so like the investor conversation for expansion. So some of you are working on a product that has no geographic component to it. right? It's an app, it's a SaaS solution. The fact that a potential customer's in Memphis, Tennessee, or Houston, or Atlanta makes no difference to you. They're just somebody out there on the internet that you're going to support via web chat or email or whatever. So we're going to set those aside. Others of you have an offering that needs to be sold, meaning in your case, let's use healthcare institutions. You go knock on door, you open front door, you go in and you go to the left to, you know, the head of nursing, okay? You know, that, if you have something that is a heavy touch, you've got this implication of where are you going to start? Because if you have heavy touch and you hire one sales rep, you're probably not going to give them the whole country as a territory because, you know, if they have that type of their sales call is knock on door, go in, go to the left to go to the head of nursing. If they sell across the whole country, they're going to be jumping on airplanes all the time, and that's going to cost a lot of money. So in many cases, what we do is we say, no, we're going to start in Texas, right? Maybe you start in Austin, Texas, right? And now it's down to, are there enough of your prospective customers in Austin, or does it need to be Texas? And Texas is fabulous because 4 of the 11 largest metropolitan areas are in the state of Texas. And from Austin, you can get to any of them in 3 hours. From Dallas, you can get to Houston in a few hours. From Houston, you get to San Antonio in a couple hours, right? So we do like that. And then there might be things that then, after you prove things out and you figure out what type of person you need to hire to be effective at sales, you figure out how to price your product, some of those basics, yeah, you go hire one and you put them in Atlanta and Chicago and New York and LA. So that could be a logical strategy that has nothing to do with online marketplaces, more has to do with the sales strategy that you overlay on top of this customer acquisition. Customer acquisition is broader than sales because it includes the marketing component. You got to get them from discovery all the way through transaction. Sales is just a subset of that. All right, we're about 20 minutes early, so I think what we'll do is let's break. I can stick around for the rest of those 20 minutes if you guys have questions for me. Tomorrow we got a lot of good topics. Well, I think every day we've got some great topics, so hopefully I'll see you again tomorrow. If you got the red ticket, I think it was, that we handed out at the beginning, just wave that on your way in. You don't have to register again, or you don't have to check in. Just wave your ticket. If you didn't get the workbooks that we sent out, just email foundersacademy@capitalfactory.com, and we'll get you those PDFs. If you want to print them, that's fine. I left some space for taking notes. And if you're not a physical note taker like that, then you've got it for future reference. All right, I'm going to stick around. See y'all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks.